So we'll get started. A very good morning to everyone, and thank you for taking your time out for attending this webinar. Uh, Over the next 30 to 40 minutes, we'll probably focus on the key challenges with the non-for-profit sector faces in the technology area. Uh, Technology of late has been kind of the driver for most organizations. Uh, More so in the business area, uh, but equally important in the non-for-profit sector as well. Okay. Uh, One of the prime reasons that we've seen and for the non-for-profit sector in terms of the challenges they face has been the changing customer expectations over the last years. And that's something that we will talk over the next, along with technology expert, uh, in terms of the kind of challenges that they face, not only in terms of the changing customer expectations, the changing regulatory compliances that being enforced upon them, the need for maintaining security of donor data, customer data, employee data, all of it together. And I think all these are getting to be more and more of paramount importance in the days to come. Alignment of technology along with business goals is something that we keep hearing from most corporate organizations. Is it any different for non-profit? While they may not have clear business goals, most non-profit have a mission to achieve. I think this alignment of their technology with the mission takes prime importance. And given the fact that non-for-profit segment works always with tight budgets, the ability to leverage technology in spite of the cost that is increasing, ability to do more with less, is something that I think are key imperatives for these organizations to succeed in this tough tech world where technology today has pretty much taken up most of our lives. Today's discussion I'm going to talk about is we're going to talk about how relevant are these challenges for these non-for-profit segments and how, as somebody who's been on the client side of things, we will have Bala. I will talk about more about this as we move forward. Talk about how, in his 20 years of experience, he's been able to manage and wade through all these challenges. This is the theme today. Talk about, have a conversation. We talk about challenges, how they've been able to be addressed. Is there a one-size-fit-all approach to solve some of these issues? With the plethora of technology innovations happening, how does one prioritize these investments? And most importantly, how do we get more with less? And I think Bala will probably give us the secret sauce, hopefully, by the end of this conversation. We also have a chat window. So any of your questions, please put them on the chat window. We will take all these questions towards the end of this webinar. Let me quickly now get to introduce to you Bala, who is our key speaker for today. Bala comes in with about 20 years of experience, has been at multiple roles, been a C-level executive for close to a couple of decades, and has seen the transformation of IT over the years. And not only transformation, his role in IT across various functions, be it strategy, be it product management, be it R&D, be it infrastructure, be it development. So pretty much he understands the IT function of organizations so well. And I think we couldn't have got a better speaker today to address some of these. In his last assignment, he was most recently he was the CTO of the Lions Clubs International, probably one of the largest organizations in the non-for-profit sectors. Lions has close to about thousands of clubs across the world, and probably the kind of projects that they've done is humongous. Bala has also been a CTO of and an SVP in some of the EdTech firms, some public listed firms. So, which means the kind of experience that he brings in for today's discussion, I think, is across not just on non-for-profit, but across industries. But I think his ability, therefore, to relate to non-for-profit vis-a-vis the general corporate world, I think, will be a great use for all of us. Currently, Bala just, I think, has decided, I think he's had enough of the corporate world. He's kind of wanted to have more meaningful life. He's moved into the academic field. He teaches at the Arizona State University in a non-tenured capacity. But how can one let go of somebody with so much of rich experience? So a lot of organizations, be it startups, be it established organizations, lean on Bala's expertise to some of their ticklish technology challenges. Okay. Talking to Bala will be myself, yours faithfully, Jagan. I come in from a service provider perspective, been in the IT infrastructure services area for close to 30 years, seen the entire IT infrastructure transform from mainframes to distributed computing to virtualization and now to cloud. So I have been able to therefore help organizations transform themselves digitally, make use of all the latest technology developments which are there in the field. And as an organization, we help other companies, be it both for-profit as well as non-for-profit organizations, manage their IT. On the personal side, more have been active Rotarian, so understand the needs of a lot of these service organizations. Also co-founded a software as a service company focusing on the hospitality industry. So with this introduction, I think let me straight away move on to engaging Bala. So let me stop this presentation for a while. And Bala, you've seen the IT involvement and the development of IT over the last so many years. And you've seen the corporate world, you've seen the non-for-profit world, all of it together. Now, and earlier in the presentation, I spoke about the challenges of non-for-profit. Do you think these are relevant, or are we? Is there something more to it than what we've talking about in terms of the challenges that some of these organizations have?
Thank you, Jagan. Before I sort of respond to that, let me thank you for the wonderful introduction. Good day, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, I think it's applicable to all companies. It's interesting. It's depending on your frame of mind, you can either call it a perfect storm or a confluence of factors. Depending on what you look at. And I think what is happening in the industry is that a series of things are happening that are common, I think, to corporate as well as not-for-profit. One is the end consumer or the donor, in the case of not-for-profit, or a person who is a volunteer, as also expecting technology and a level of sophistication that they're used to in their regular world, whether they're used to being a consumer in a banking sector, or even the way they shop or the way they do things. Technology has become such an integral part of their day-to-day life. I think it's natural for them to expect the same level of sophistication when they interact with a not-for-profit organization. So that's one sort of factor. The second, I think, is the complexity in technology. I think now, in the current century, there is hardly any system that does everything, right? So no system is in an island. So and the moment you talk about solutions, you're talking about integration across different systems and applications, and the level of sophistication that you need to make that work has increased quite a bit. Then you get to the level of sophistication on, what are often referred to as threat actors. The amount of hacking that goes on, the number of ransom attacks that have happened, whether it's in corporate world or for not-for-profit, has increased. And So it is, I call this a perfect storm or a confluence of factors where an expectation is increasing, but so is the sophistication that you have to do to manage those expectations and the threat actors that are out there. And by the way, everything is, the prices are going up and you tend to have fixed budget, right? So you're kind of getting all these factors. And I think it's absolutely relevant for not for profit as well as for corporate world.
Thanks, Bala. You talk about threat actors, you talked about hacking, and I think over the last few years, the threat is becoming much more real. The
Yeah.
threat is becoming much more dangerous for most organizations. Therefore, from a non-for-profit organizations, are there any governance issues from that point of view? Because I think they deal with a whole lot of data, which is personal data. So,
Right.
are there governance challenges? Uh, how do you handle them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this one, to a certain extent, depends also to an individual not-for-profit firm and the kind of thing that they do. But if you are somebody who is looking for donors and you're managing your own credit cards, processing, then obviously PCI compliance becomes a factor. Or if you are like when I was in Lions Clubs International, if you have members from a different country. So, for example, Lions Clubs has been is around in 190 countries, and a good chunk of it is in Europe. And Europe has GDPR, the private data privacy regulatory things, and it's it's probably one of the best privacy regulations that a particular country has enacted. And you could potentially have things like, a member can come and say, hey, can you tell me all the systems that you have my information in? And by the way, if I'm dropping as a member, you've given a set time, and after that, you have to completely eliminate all my data and prove to me that you have. So that level of tracking of a particular donor or a member inherently forces you to make sure you know which all the systems that are out there that have the data. And so now, given that, through an organic evolution, very rarely do you have it in one system. You tend to have it in multiple systems. And so you now have to keep track of all that. And you have to now safeguard all that. So anytime there is an attack, your data now becomes vulnerable, right? And so, do we keep the data at rest at encrypted form? Do we make sure that the backups are encrypted? And, things that are part and parcel of a good organization, but becomes hard when you have a not-for-profit and that is not your main focus. Your main focus is to, do good and do the things that you have to do and satisfy your donors. I think it becomes harder and harder. So regulatory reforms, depending on whether you have the, exposure on that side, becomes a huge deal. And I think it's a question of time, to be honest with you, that US will follow suit to something very similar to GDPR. They've already started it in California for corporations, not-for-profit, but just corporations. So I think it's a question of time that we're going to see something very similar in our country compared in terms of privacy as well. So I think it is good to be prepared.
Yeah, I think it's right. Every country now has started to put together their own privacy laws. Singapore has its own laws. So I guess things like that, every country started doing that. But having said that, if you look at the non-for-profit in sector itself, you have a large organizations like the Lions Clubs on one side. You also have a very small organizations.
Sure.
We are probably serving a small set of community. Uh, how does this? I mean, for them, the all of them, be it the large organizations or the small, they still deal with personal data. They
Yeah.
still deal with what should I say, data which can be compromised in that sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you reckon that small organizations, which probably work with much more limited budget than some of the larger ones,
Yeah.
handle some of these things? I mean, it's required, yet uh, their funding levels are significantly lower. How do you
Right.
think that they would be able to manage this? Is it just that they do a break fix kind of model and they say, okay, I will run it the way I want to run it? What's your view on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hard question in the sense, there's a couple of things. One is, I think there is a tactical side to this question as well as a strategic side to the question, right? And this tactical side in terms of how do they currently manage, because I still have stuff to do, and I need to run the organization. I may resort a little more into the break fix side of things to say, hey, I know that I've got to manage it for the next few months till I come up with a strategic solution that will help me in the long run. So I think it's one of those things where, where we say in IT, you've got to sort of fly the plane at the same time as changing the engine and all that stuff, right? So which is never easy. But I think that's sort of how I would approach it. I would approach it as, okay, let me look at short term tactical. What do I need to do in the next few months while I work on a longer strategic solution to it? And the strategic solution could be, I believe, um, multi-pronged solution. What I mean by that is you may want to resort to partnerships. You may want to look at, rely on experts such as those who are, software providers who do a much better job in protecting assets than perhaps you and I could ever do. But at the same time, you need partners to implement it. So I think it needs to be a multi-pronged strategy for that. And I think, if I'm now starting a not-for-profit, or I've just, done it for the last 4 or 5 years, I think this would be a good time for me to step back and say, what can I rely on in partners for taking over a lot of my challenges so that I can focus on what I do best, which is, pushing forward in my not-for-profit agenda and perhaps working with my stakeholders and donors and so on.
Yeah. Thanks, Bala. I think again, you kind of led me to the next thing straight away. You talked about focusing on what my objectives are as an organization, what my mission is to work with my stakeholders, like your donors, your beneficiaries, your employees, etc., etc. So, which means that this engagement with all these stakeholders becomes important. And today, from what it used to be earlier to what it is now, engagement with these stakeholders itself, technology has kind of overtaken the way you engage with with these people.
Yeah.
So where you are again, I'm trying to bring in the role of technology, not from a point of view of running your IT, but also from a point of view of engaging all these stakeholders.
Yeah.
So where do you see that going?
Yeah, I think it's an integral part. Technology is going to be an integral part. I have to quote the CEO Satya Nadella of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, who said, "Every company is becoming a software company," and what he's really saying here is that you can't ignore technology and say, "Hey, this is not what I do, so I don't have to pay attention to it," because it's become such an integral part of how you run a business that you have to pay attention to it, right? So now, and this is where I think you leverage technology on the strategic side of engaging with your stakeholders, coming up with marketing campaigns that are better targeted than they might have been in the past. So use analytics and things of that sort. So now all of a sudden, you may have had a shoestring technology budget, and you now realize you need to spend more on technology. So you've got a couple of different ways to do it, because you can either take money from some other part, right? Or you can say, the things that I do, what I think of as block and tackling, the stuff that is, the bread and butter, or whatever analogy you want to use, how can I do that for a less price than what I may have done in the past? And how can I take some of that and now work on these types of initiatives, which technology may have never been a part of in engaging the customer or the donor or the stakeholder prior to in the last, let's say, 5-10 years. So every not-for-profit organization needs to view technology not just as a tactical tool, but also a strategic tool. And when you do that, and when you do make that shift, obviously now you have to make sure you are being efficient in your tactical side in order for you to spend time on the strategic side. Because if you're not doing a very good job on the tactical side, chances are you're not going to do a very good job on the strategic side with technology either. So you've got to do that balancing, and you've got to become an expert in this. And that's where I think you have to step back and say, how can I do things more efficiently in my day to day, whether it's infrastructure or whether it's support of ERP systems or accounting or whatever the case may be. How do I do those things well and very efficiently so that I can now focus on things where I can leverage technology from an engagement and other strategic initiatives?
So which means, I mean, again, talking of the strategic shift, you did mention about the fact that technology is becoming integral part of an organization. So, in the sense that it's more strategic, it's a part of uh, overall strategy of the organization. Which means that if you look at the corporate world, we talk about aligning technology with the business goals.
Yeah.
Right. I guess the same applies to these the non-profit organizations aligning with their vision and things like that. But having said that, and you also talked about how ability to get more with less in terms of I mean, they all have budget constraints. So is it actually is it a buzzword? Is it a pipe dream to align all of it, or you really think it's the order of the day? You have no choice but to start putting it in that model.
Yeah, I don't think it's a pipe dream, but I think it's a pipe dream if you think that we can wave a hand and get all this done, right? I think it's hard work, and I think what also needs to be good is on the strategic side, on the business objectives. I think it's vital to prioritize. There's a tendency to say we need to do these 15 things, and we need to do these 15 things very well. And by the way, technology should help you in all those 15 things. And I think reality is that unless you have a blank check, and which almost and nobody has, forget corporate or not for profit, nobody has a blank check. I think you have to clearly say, what are the top 3 to 5 things we want to achieve? And then align technology with that. And then you sort of go through and put together a roadmap that says, I'm looking at a 3-year roadmap. And based on what these are, here are the 3 things I want to do. And it could be, I want to improve my efficiency in my infrastructure and other day-to-day things. I need to come up with, I'm just making things up, right? But give you an idea as an illustration. Come up with more engaging platforms for our donors, right? And the third may be protecting myself with all sorts of regulatory things and making sure, whether on infrastructure side or on privacy, that I can do a very good job of safeguarding my customers, PII information, right? So I think if those are my 3 things, then what are my options, right? And the one thing that I would say is, while it may appear daunting, what I am encouraged by is the number of innovations that are taking place in the whole ecosystem around us, right? Whether it is infrastructure firms like yours, or whether it's startups that are focusing on providing accounting and other types of services for small to medium organizations. I mean, the sheer number of innovative solutions that are coming up are pretty impressive. And I think what that tells us is you're not alone in this fight, right? You don't need to be alone in this fight. You can leverage all the innovations that are going on in this ecosystem and become partners with some key firms and leverage them to get to what your final objectives are, and get to execute on the roadmap that you may have come up with.
In fact, Bala, I just thought I should just bounce this off you. What we at 4D, we primarily, you're aware that we are on the infrastructure side. So having understood this kind of challenges which these organizations face, we actually put together something what we call as infrastructure in a box,
Mm-hmm.
where we are actually trying to move from owning infrastructure to provisioning of infrastructure as a service.
Yeah.
So which means that you rightly talked about privacy. You talked about whether my backups are happening at time. You talked about availability of infrastructure. People today are working across locations. They're working from home. So to be able to service all of them, we kind of trying to put together a solution where it's a bouquet of services available, right? It's a bouquet of services available. So from the non-profit point of view, they can pick and choose all of it. They can pick and choose a few of it, and all they do is to pay for those services rather than, because even if you, let's say, go to the lowest end of you want to buy a laptop, I think there is a decision-making process within the organization.
Mhm.
You need to look at specifications, you need to look at price. So we're trying to kind of move that from the whole thing of saying, whether you want to buy a server in your data center, the same thing applies. So we just say, you decide what you want, we will provision it for you. It's something that we're trying to come up with, and we put together a solution. I mean, what's your thoughts on a solution offering like that?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I mean, this is exactly what I was telling you about when I say innovation in the ecosystem, right? I mean, I talked about accounting because I'm familiar with a company that is a startup that is essentially trying to look at, providing accounting and payroll types of services to startups and other small and other not-for-profit. But infrastructure is a key component to it, right? Imagine, even if I have 10 employees, the fact that I need to make sure that there is, I have to get 10 machines with the right image, and more importantly, make sure that the patches that these companies keep providing are being updated and done, right? Because that's part of the problem. Part of the problem is Microsoft or anybody comes and says, hey, there's a security patch, you got to apply it. And if you have your own servers, God help you, right? Whether it's your own firewall servers and all that stuff, and that makes it even harder. So, and if you want to run it by yourself, you are essentially going through hiring and getting the right set of people. And where do you draw the line? Because, like I said, the sophistication of some of these hacks that are happening are just getting more and more. And you really need to rely on partners such as you, infrastructure services like you guys, or Microsoft, or whoever your cloud provider is, and make sure these things are taken care of. And even if you just go to Microsoft and say, I do everything in Microsoft or Amazon, that's not necessarily the end of it, because you need to constantly keep monitoring that and making sure those things are being done. And you need an infrastructure partner for that. And I think your idea is right on. I think it is absolutely a need, I believe, for companies that are coming up, as well as companies that have spent a lot. Even mature companies uh, like Lions Clubs and others can probably take advantage of some of these services. And I think I like the way you have sort of said, it's a menu of services, and some people may take more, some people may take less. I think will resonate with a lot of not-for-profit organizations. I think it's a good idea. Yeah.
I just want to quickly go to that slide about our offering of infrastructure in a box, just to illustrate what we're talking about. Essentially, we're moving it from asset loaded to asset light. So since that you don't own any of them, all of them can be made available to you as services.
Mhm.
And be it your workload, be it your compute capability, being your resources in terms of, you talked about resources availability itself is the challenge. Resource skilling is the next challenge.
Sure.
We talked about that, and then whether it is in terms of your governance, you got of security and privacy. So pretty much we're trying to put this together. This is something that we want to go and offer it to focus specifically for the non-profit segment, uh, because we understand their concerns in terms of budgets. So we're trying to see how we can make it, optimize it, and cost efficiently deliver it to them.
Yeah,
I'm very happy to hear that you feel that it's probably in the right direction.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think if you can sort of look at the whole process, right? Not just whether it's laptop procurement, but also software license management. All those things become important, and And yes, the cloud has helped us in that, and I would encourage people to sort of look at some of the offerings out there. But I think you still need someone to manage all that, and more importantly, keep your infrastructure to protect against some of these attacks and stuff like that, right? Because I think how much do you really know? Yes, your database might be encrypted, but people may be exchanging Excel files of
Oh, yeah. Oh,
customers,
yeah.
in email, or save it into a laptop or in a hard disk or something. So there is so much going on that I really do think that relying on expertise is probably an almost becomes a must, if you will, because I think trying to do it yourself is going to be hard if you're a small not for, or even if you're a big not-for-profit organization.
I think that, Bala, I think we kind of I'm getting to the close of our conversation. I mean, it's been I would say excellent interaction. It's kind of thrown open eyes to the challenges, the possible solutions. And I think coming from somebody like you who's been there and done that, I think uh, kind of gives a completely different perspective. I really thank you for your time. I'd also like to thank all the attendees of this webinar. Any questions? Let me just check whether there are any specific questions on the chat forum. Just give me a minute. Yeah, I have one question here from Ranga. It talks about optimization of IT and support costs. Typically, where do not-for-profits start their optimization?
Yeah, I think there isn't, and I wanted to say, unfortunately, there isn't one solution or one secret sauce, as you had initially said in the beginning, Jagan. I think it depends on a case by case basis. And so, I would encourage all not for profit firms to do is do an assessment in terms of, where you're spending most of your dollars, and are you getting the return for those dollars, right? And how do you sort of measure that? And how you measure that is, let's say you feel that your average procurement costs are X, and try to benchmark or reach out to companies like yours, Jagan, and say, hey, what is the average cost for looking at some of these things, and benchmark yourself to say, are you doing an efficient way of doing it? The other thing I would say is that, anytime when you look at costs in a technology organization, especially a technology organization which may not have taken advantage of geographical arbitrage, for lack of a better phrase, is something that they may want to look at, right? Because um, clearly we want to look at more ways of efficiently doing something. And so if there is an element of geographical arbitrage there, that might be something they may definitely want to explore, right? So I don't think there is one answer, Rangarajan. I really think that they need to analyze where their spend is, look at whether they feel and benchmark themselves with what's out there, and see whether there are opportunities. And then you go after, the low hanging fruit, so to speak, which ones are the easiest to do with the most impact, then followed by more complicated things to do with more impact, so on. So I would almost put together, sort of the square, if you will, of impact versus effort, and go after those things.
Yeah. In fact, I think I would like to add something here at our, what we've kind of put together is we actually do an assessment. Do an assessment where we can actually make an assessment of their current level of maturity, and we can therefore tell them that if you're in a certain level of maturity, for you to move further, what are the things that you need to do, and then which helps the organization prioritize it. That's what we actually have been offering. Uh, I think there's one more question about while we're talking about focus on the objectives and while with partners to leverage their expertise, uh, would cost be a key parameter vis-a-vis affordability or cost be one of the key parameters vis-a-vis for-profit companies?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I do confess most of what I said is applicable to both for profit
Yeah.
and not for profit. But I think what happens specifically in not for profit is things get more exacerbated, if I can use that term, or more sort of amplified. And so what I mean by that is take um, take the challenge to hire the right experts and right skillful people, especially in the area of technology. There you get into a challenge. Typically, not-for-profit organizations don't have the same level of compensation that you may have in corporate world. Granted, there is this thing we tend to say, there's a quality of life is better and all that, but when you look at the real talent and skills you need in the area of technology, especially in the area of security and privacy and things like that, um, it becomes more amplified in not-for-profit than in for-profit world. So hiring and getting the right skills becomes much harder. Therefore, it becomes harder for you to do it yourself. So reliance on a partner, I think, becomes more important. The second is what this gentleman said about affordability or cost. Absolutely, right? If I don't have the kind of revenue that I may have in the corporate world, all the more reason why I need to look at what is the most efficient way to do things. And that's where, sometimes the people resort to maybe offshoring and stuff like that. But for smaller companies, it becomes harder to do so. That's why I really do think that this notion of infrastructure in a box, and the key to that I think it almost needs to be extremely simple from an end user perspective. It's almost like if I'm a small not for profit, I can go to some some site on the internet and I say, I need these 7 things for my infrastructure, and I click on it, and voila, your solution gives it to me. That is where I think the real key thing would be. So yes, whatever I said tended to be applicable to both, but I think certain things get more amplified in the not for profit world.
Good. I think thanks, Bala. I think it's been actually been a fantastic session with you. Really appreciate your time. And for those of you who've any other questions, we can probably take it offline. While there are none at this point in time, feel free to reach out to us, and I think we will probably touch base with Bala and give you some of those answers. Bala, once again, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate your candid, clear, and what should I say? So clear in your thoughts in terms of the kind of prioritization that one needs to do. And we would also like to thank all the participants of this webinar. The recorded version will be made available to you shortly. So in case if during the course of this you have missed out on any of these things, you could probably look at the recording. Thank you so much, and good day to everyone. And
thank you, Jagan. Appreciate the opportunity. Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye now.